Hey everybody, this is Asher with a no BS review for Curse of the Dead Gods. Short answer is to get it. Get the game. It's a good game. It's an action roguelike that has a lot of different interlocking systems that work very well together, and overall it is well worth your time. You should be able to get a lot of good enjoyment out of it. Now, if you have familiar with this game or if you followed it since early access, there's probably a lot you know about it, but if you're fence sitting or maybe this is news to you, this game's come out, let me give you just some good points to consider and some things to look out for. I'll go over the good first. The game has very deliberate combat. If you've played other games, and probably the one that this gets compared the most to is Hades, with good reason, because that's the standard bearer for new action roguelikes. The combat here uses a stamina system, which means that you can't just spam attacks and run around everywhere. Rolling takes stamina. Parrying restores stamina. Parrying is actually very important in this game, so is positioning. So combat overall is not so spammy, not so twitchy. It can be sometimes, but it's a lot more like a Fromsoft game or a lot more like any of the Dark Souls, Demon Souls games, where you can take your time running around the room wondering how everybody's going to kill you. Which gets to the atmosphere of the game. I think this game looks very good. The art style is obviously a little bit different, but when you go into these temples and dungeons, it looks like you're exploring something that's straight out of like the old Nickelodeon show Legend of the Hidden Temple, or really anything else. The aesthetic is very consistent throughout these things. I do like the art style a lot. The corruption system is another thing that's very good. If you look on the bottom right of the screen here, you have some little bars. If you've seen me play or other people play, which I do encourage you to take a look at, there is a corruption system. It's not like the stress system from Darkest Dungeon, where if your stress gets high enough, you get a malus and then might have a heart attack and die. The corruption system in this game is much more similar to Eternal Darkness, a game from a good while ago off of the GameCube, originally developed on the N64. It's not as trippy as Eternal Darkness, but there are curses that will fundamentally affect your gameplay. And the thing that I really like about these curses is that not all of them are bad. Sometimes they work really well with the strategy that you're already running, or can dictate the strategy you want to run, such as usually you want to have a torch and stay in the light. But sometimes with some curses, it'll make it dark, and then you get bonus damage for being in the dark. It can work out pretty well. Another thing to keep in mind for things that are good, and you see I have an asterisk here, is enemy variety. There are a lot of different types of enemies, a lot of different types of attacks, certainly on par with other roguelikes that are out there. But I do have an asterisk here, and the thing you want to keep in mind, and one of the things I've seen complained about the most on Steam reviews, is that when you enter a dungeon, like there's 3 dungeons, Jaguar, Serpent, and Eagle. When you enter that dungeon, you are in that dungeon. That means for 30-ish floors, you're going to be fighting the same bosses from those dungeons. You're going to be fighting the same enemies from those dungeons. Now, as you go further in, there's some more enemies that produce, and there's glowy eye versions that have stronger and worse attacks, but you are going to have to get to know those enemies and stick around and sit with them for a while. So I do like the enemy variety personally, but I did want to flag that there because I have seen people complain about when they enter a dungeon, it feels like they're fighting the same thing for a while, as opposed to other games like Dead Cells or Hades again, where you do progress through different areas. Another thing that I really do like about this one is the upgrade paths, which I'm just going to take a moment to pop this down on the screen. There is a progression that you can go through in this game. There's lots of different weapons that you can unlock, and I do have the sound turned off here because it gets a little awkward going from here to there. But there is a lot of meta progression. There's different blessings. You can see I haven't even unlocked anything. Like I said, the thing that is important for me to consider about this game is just how much do you have to grow into there. So we will get into that in a little bit, but there's lots of different weapons, and these weapons, and when I talk about upgrade paths, I'm both talking about the meta progression, where different things you can do, including Divine Favors, which is additional rerolls to unlock, as well as during the dungeon, which I'm not going to get into at this point, kind of beyond the scope of the video, where you go into the dungeon and you end up being able to upgrade weapons, upgrade stats, things like that. There's a lot of meaningful choices from run to run, and that's one of the most important things to me, is that you can sometimes gravitate towards strategies that you like, but overall, you want to be able to have a game where, especially if you're doing repeated content like this, where I'm going to go through a dungeon today, is it going to run the same way every time? Where it's not. In my experience, at least with Curse of the Dead Gods, it hasn't so far. Now, things to look out for, and that's stuff on the right. This is stuff that may be eventually fixed with the 1.0 release, because this is being posted the same day as the 1.0 release. But some things that I want to look out for as I'm playing this, and I want to inform you all that I'm looking out for as I play this coming from the early access. First one, big one, is frame jumps. My computer specs are well beyond what's required for the system requirements here. And yet, excuse me. And yet, as I've been playing through, sometimes the game will stutter, and you know you do not want stuttering during an action-heavy sequence in an action roguelike. So I have seen the developers have been working very hard on getting this game on multiple platforms. So hopefully it's something where if they haven't addressed it yet at the 1.0, they'll address any stutters that happen soon. I will say it doesn't happen all the time on my system, but at least once or twice per run, especially when it's transitioning between zones or there's a lot of crap going on the screen. So it's a little disappointing that it still comes to that. I reported it one of the first days I played the game. I'm sure it's something the devs are aware of. Another thing to look out for and flag is end content, which is another thing I've seen complained about on some Steam reviews. And that's something that I think is going to be addressed a bit more in the 1.0, but I do want to see it more. And in the early access, there were dungeons you could go up to longer points, more difficult points. And then there were event dungeons that were on a rotating schedule, and one would unlock per day. Those are good. 1.0 introduces another endgame feature, which is actually being able to fight the dead gods and the final boss and everything like that. So that'll be very interesting. But once all that dust settles, once all that content is clear, what I'm really interested in seeing is what keeps bringing you back to play the game again after you've unlocked the stuff, after you've beaten the stuff. And I'm of the school of thought that, you know what, if I get like 50 cents per hour I put into a game for what I paid for it, great. I got my value, I'm happy. But I know other people that don't want to purchase a game unless they can get hundreds of hours into it. And I've seen plenty of people that have been willing to do that. It may or may not be for you. But if it is just a rotating cycle of event dungeons and that's it, there's plenty of different types of event dungeons. I want to see the developer put in more. Another point here, and this may be resolved in the 1.0 as well, is a lack of story. Now, you don't need a great story to make a good game if it has very good gameplay. But in terms of the early access, the story is literally, here's a dude that gets locked in a temple, go crazy. There's no other background. There's nothing about who the jaguar, who the eagle, who the serpent are. If that's something that is revealed and brought into play and actually narrated a bit more into the 1.0 release, I wouldn't mind that at all. Other people I know, they really like Hades because they really get attached to the characters and want to know more. They like other roguelikes, like even like FTL, because you get little bits and pieces dropped in from time to time. FTL Faster Than Light, or even Into the Breach, where you get bits and pieces of game lore that are just thrown at you from time to time. That what gets thrown at you at Curse of the Dead Gods is you get corrupted and you have enemies trying to kill you. You'll occasionally get some italicized text from getting corrupted that talks about what the dead guards are kind of thinking or what a curse might mean, but it's not a lot of context. And then finally, another thing to look out for, and this is not a blight against Curse of the Dead Gods, just the reality of the situation. This is a great year, great time to be playing action roguelikes. It is a scary ass time to be releasing action roguelikes because this is a very crowded genre. There's a lot of really good games that are out there right now, and I would say that Curse of the Dead Gods is a really good game that goes toe-to-toe with other things that are out there, including aforementioned Game of the Year, Hades. But that's up to you. Definitely do your own research as well. At least it has my recommendation for what that's worth if you're watching this. So I appreciate your time. Feel free to answer any or ask any questions or answer any questions that you see in the comments if they come. But this is Asher. I recommend Curse of the Dead Gods. I think it's very good. I think there's some things to definitely look out for going forward, but it's worth your time, worth your money. Go explore, have some good times in the temple. Thank you. Take care.